Welcome back to the France 24 debate. 1 month on, Israel's prime minister can talk up the prospect of a long war. We'll hear from him, but surely that can't be possible. So what's the alternative? Before October 7th, Israeli hawks cynically characterized periodic flare-ups with Gaza as mowing the lawn. Now, after the bloodiest day since independence for Israel, fighting on multiple fronts, and the killing of more than 10,000 Palestinians, reality can no longer be ignored, nor can each other side's pain. The Algerian writer Kamel Daoud recently warned not to fall into the trap of turning death tolls and suffering into a kind of football match where you keep score. Much harder is finding common ground and unearthing the forlorn path to a viable and lasting political settlement. Today, in a 1 month on anniversary edition of the France 24 debate, that's just what we're going to try to do. With from Jerusalem, Ayala Shalev, regional manager of the Hands of Peace advocacy group. Thanks for being with us. From Tel Aviv, Ibrahim Abu Ahmad of the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics and Security. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
From Washington, he splits his time between the U.S. and East Jerusalem Palestinian peace activist Aziz Abu Sarah. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me as well.
And from London, Hannah Weisfeld, director of Yashad UK. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Your questions and reactions, welcome as always on the hashtag F24debate. Yeah, it's 1 month after October the 7th. What we have seen is relentless bombings this Tuesday. More inroads, says Israel's defense minister. We've also seen tributes and vigils, at least 242 hostages taken on October 7th by Hamas and other militant groups. Catherine Norris-Trent has more on that.
Every Saturday in Tel Aviv for the past month, when the families of Israeli hostages gather, the pain pours out.
Please, I've been holding up for a month. People say I'm like a lioness, that I'm strong, but I'm not strong. Stop it. I've got no strength left. Please, I've been waiting for a month. I've had no news of her. Where is she? Has she got anything to eat or drink? Is she under or above the ground? Please, bring her home today. I need to see her today.
For these families, time has stood still since the 7th of October. Only a handful of the more than 240 hostages have been released. On this symbolic Shabbat table, an empty place setting for every missing soul. Among them, Inbar Hyman, whose partner Noam is living in torment.
Even when she will return, you cannot really know what will be her mental condition. They might return with her body, but not with her soul. And I really hope that not only that she will return, but she will be strong enough to continue in our life, because I'm just imagining what she's passing through, how she's managed to survive.
It's difficult to overstate the impact of the 7th of October on Israel. The atrocities of that day have left a deep scar on this nation, which will take years to heal and will forever leave a scar on Israeli society.
How to deal with the sheer terror and now prolonged agony of the hostage crisis. A help centre for the hostages' loved ones is open 7 days a week in Tel Aviv.
This forum is like it's their house. Some of them come here on a daily basis. It's as if they can't pull themselves away. Some of them don't come ever. And we're just, communicating with them over the phone and those kind of things. Most of them are not susceptible right now for a deep emotional therapy. Right now, what they need is to connect themselves to their abilities.
And faced with nationwide pain, post-traumatic stress specialists are organising urgent training for some 1,600 Israeli psychologists.
Ayala Shalev, when you turn back the clock a month, Israel had been in this almighty showdown over a judicial overhaul, the most far-right government ever. Those who were targeted on October the 7th, for the most part, their from that secular peace camp. 1 month on, when you see that report, do you feel as though the families of those who are missing are being supported? Is the country behind them?
It's getting there. The first weeks were such a shock that everybody was busy, tending their own wounds, and but slowly it's getting there. More and more support of the families and the cry out to get the hostages back is sounding, and there's people, civilians, babies, children, old people that were taken, and nobody knows what's going on with them. It's a deep wound.
Israel's prime minister says that you can only stop the fighting in Gaza once the hostages have been released. Is that the feeling among your circle?
No, the feeling more and more gets to, the first priority needs to be get these people back. It doesn't matter what the price is.
Right now, that's not the case, though. Instead, the fighting is intensifying.
Yes.
Well, what we're seeing is the emotion when it comes to those who've been slain and those who are missing from the Israeli side. The same is true for the Palestinians. Israel's military response has kicked into high gear. There's been the encirclement of Gaza City, the splitting in two of that Palestinian territory, and the relentless pounding of airstrikes with outgoing rocket fire in response. There was on Monday a moment of emotion during a cabinet meeting in Ramallah presided over by the Palestinian Prime Minister.
أطفال يكتبون أسماءهم على أجسادهم لكي يتم التعرف على جثامينهم. والدة الأطفال الثلاثة الذين دفنوا تحت الركام تقول لأطفالها: خلوني أشوفكم ولو.
The tears there that the Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh is trying to hold back. Ibrahim Abdul Ahmad, it's a feeling that we've seen in a lot of places, obviously in the last month. And there's a feeling of, should we say, helplessness?
I think there is a feeling of helplessness from everybody. And if you look at the civilian populations, both civilians feel very helpless at the moment. On the Palestinian side, the feeling is that, their airstrikes keep going and there's nothing to stop them. And the world can call out, but that won't change what the reality on the ground is. That the airstrikes are going, Palestinians are getting killed. And the same holds true for the Israeli side, that the helplessness in terms of the kidnapped, looking at whether or not they will see their people, their loved ones again. And unfortunately, what we're seeing right now from the military, the way that the military is operating at the moment, as if the people are turning into collateral damage. It's heartbreaking to say, but that's how it looks like right now, that we will go in as the Israeli military, and the target is to wipe out Hamas, whatever that is. And if our people also will get into it, it will be just part of us trying to wipe out this enemy. But that's not the way. That's not the way forward. Because what happens after this war? What happens next? What are you doing with Gaza? There are so many so many questions that have no answer on the Israeli side. And that's part of the feeling of helplessness that we feel also as peace activists, trying to understand where is this going. But in the same time, we should be actually looking at this as the opportunity in the middle of all this mess to turn things around, to have this as the last straw for everyone.
Yeah, what happens next is the question we're going to address. Just a quick question, though, before we get to it, to you, Ibrahim. When you think back to the last time Israel was at war with Gaza in 2014, it lasted 6 weeks. How different is it?
In terms of difference, that's a really difficult question, to be honest. I mean, the first week was relatively similar to what I would remember from the beginning of 2014. So the result, or the target of what the Israeli military was trying to achieve by it was a bit unclear. I think people expected immediate ground invasion. That didn't happen. It's been withholding since, and only airstrikes. So only when a potential actual ground invasion happens, we could see something that's beyond what we saw in 2014. But that's exactly the problem. This is not the first time. We had 2014, and we had the 2011. We had 2008. 3 military operations already in Gaza without any real resolutions. That's exactly the essence of the problem.
Yeah, the U.S. has been asking Israel to formulate its plan for what Antony Blinken has repeatedly called the day after, when the fighting stops, what Ibrahim's talking about there. Shirley Sitbon has more on Binyamin Netanyahu's answer, which came Monday evening on U.S. national television.
الأطفال يكتبون أسماءهم على أجسادهم لكي يتم التعرف على جثامينهم. ولدت الأطفال الثلاثة الذين دفنوا تحت الركام.
All right, apologies. Let's try to cross over to that report now by Shirley Sitbon.
1 month into the war between Hamas and Israel, new bombings hit Gaza and flares lit the sky, allowing Israeli troops to continue their ground offensive. While the soldiers moved closer to the heart of Gaza City, the Israeli Prime Minister gave his first interview to the foreign press, with some indications of his goals for the next phases of the war.
Israel to occupy Gaza.
I think Israel will, for an indefinite period, will have the overall security responsibility, because we've seen what happens when we don't have it.
In another key answer, Netanyahu said short humanitarian truces would be possible to allow aid into Gaza, but he excluded a ceasefire.
Well, there will be no ceasefire, general ceasefire in Gaza without the release of our hostages. I think it will hamper the war effort.
A position backed again by the U.S. at the UN.
We've talked about humanitarian pauses, and we're interested in pursuing language on that score, but there are disagreements within the Council.
Many countries and some of Israel's allies are pushing for a full ceasefire, and pressure rises as airstrikes make more and more Palestinian victims.
Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children. Hundreds of girls and boys are reportedly being killed or injured every day.
The Israelis say their goal is to dismantle Hamas. Yet despite their incursion and intense battles with the group, Hamas continues to fire rockets at Israel from the Gaza Strip, and it says it's also behind rockets fired from Lebanon on Monday.
Aziz Abu Sarah, you heard there the Israeli Prime Minister talking about an indefinite period during which Israel reoccupies Gaza. It sounds a bit like a medium-term plan. Your thoughts on that?
It's very disappointing to hear it, but obviously the last few weeks have been disappointing, watching so many people die, so many people get hurt, a lot of people that I know who've been killed, who've been hurt, both in Israel and in the West Bank and in Gaza. But I wonder, this indefinite occupation that Prime Minister Netanyahu is talking about, is he thinking like the West Bank is working? Because that's indefinite occupation, where still Israel controls about 90% of the West Bank. Is that the plan? That's what's going well for 50 plus years, having Palestinians under occupation? Or in the last month, for that matter, where you have over a dozen villages in the West Bank people being expelled from them, as we're seeing what's going on in Gaza, and distracted with the pain that's happening in Gaza, people losing their homes, being attacked, being killed by settlers with complete impunity? Is that the plan? That's really the solution for Gaza? I think it's kind of a repeating mantra. It's a repeating story of like the only way to fix this is it through occupation, is it through power, is it through force, is it through violence, and through killing more people. And it hasn't worked.
Let's break it down.
In our story.
Let's break it down, Aziz, because let's follow Israel's premise. It is fighting against Hamas. Let's say it achieves its goal of neutralizing, if you will, senior membership of Hamas. Who then polices the Gaza Strip?
I'll just say their goal, at least as stated right now, isn't to neutralize the leadership, is to completely eradicate Hamas, as they're saying, which, based on the current figures of how that's going, it'll take at least 250,000 of civilian lives. So I don't see how that's going to happen in reality unless the world says we just don't care, 10,000 or 200,000. Look, in the long run, it's not about does the Palestinian Authority control the West Bank, which is a possibility, does we get some help from other countries?
But concretely, pragmatically, what do you do?
But that's not really the question. That's not the question. I think the main question is, as long as you don't have an end of the occupation and a settlement where a Palestinian government rules Palestinian people. Look, the reason Hamas is in power because the Palestinian Authority failed to bring an agreement that ends the occupation, that Israel was not willing to end the occupation. That's why we are here. So if we continue in this, how do we end it? We come to an agreement right now. Yes, you bring the Palestinian Authority and you end the occupation, and whether you create it as two states, you do confederate, you do whichever of these solutions, that's the only way it's going to work. But doing these short-term band-aids, it's only going to get things worse and worse. And yeah, it might work for 6 months, it might work for 6 years, just like as people in 2019,
who does Israel negotiate with? Who does Israel negotiate with? Is it the Palestinian Authority?
Right now, the Palestinian Authority is the only option. I think you need an election in Gaza and in the West Bank. Remember, the last election was in 2006. Most Palestinians have never voted in their lives. Most people in Gaza never chosen not Hamas and not Fatah. The polls that at least I've looked at show that neither were popular, so there'll be other new blood that can come in. I think the problem, unfortunately, we talk about this now when everything is on fire, but we ignored it for so long. And many of us in the studio talking to you have warned that this is where we're going to end up if we don't do something about it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago when I started being a peace activist. And yes, it is so much harder to deal with it now, and it'll be even harder if we continue in this path of violence.
Things are on fire, but they can only stay on fire for so long. That's the warning from Israel's former prime minister. Speaking to Politico, Ehud Barak stated, you can see the window is closing. We will have to come to terms with the American demands within the next 2 to 3 weeks, he's saying, probably less. Is that overly optimistic? I put the question to you, Hannah Vesfeld. Do you think that fighting could end in 2 to 3 weeks?
I'm not sure that fighting will end in 2 to 3 weeks. I think it depends whether the hostages come back. I think for Israelis, that's the key issue right now, is bringing back those 240 people that are currently underground or thought to be underground in Hamas tunnels. So I think it will depend on that. I think that international goodwill towards Israel is changing, and America and I think European countries are becoming quite frustrated with what appears to be a lack of exit strategy. So you would have seen that Netanyahu said that Israel intends to maintain its security by controlling Gaza at the end of this war, and that's not something that has the backing of America, that's for sure. And so I think as long as
does he care if he doesn't have the backing of the United States on that?
Well, I think he will struggle to continue to fight it without the backing of the United States. I think that the Israeli government is reliant on that, and Netanyahu is reliant on that. And when he loses the goodwill of President Biden, he becomes even more illegitimate in the eyes of the Israeli people, which he already is, I should add, very illegitimate in the eyes of the Israeli people. So I agree entirely with Aziz that really the lack of political action around this conflict has created the mess that we're now in. And unless there is significant intervention from the international community to put the parties around the table to find a political way out of this mess, which can only be through a long-term political resolution, this war, it's very hard to see how this war really brings anyone any safety and security long-term. It might in the short term, but in the long term, it's very hard to see how it will.
Well, let me go back to Washington on this, because Aziz Abu Sarah, you can smell perhaps what the mood is in Washington. 24 hours ago, we were asking the question, who's got who over a barrel? Is it Biden who's got Netanyahu over a barrel, or the other way around? Particularly since Biden's heading into an election year. Does he want to pick a fight with Israel's prime minister?
No, I don't think he will publicly go against Netanyahu, at least not in the next few weeks, even if behind the scenes he might not be happy with what's going on, and I don't see that going on. I talk to some people here in Washington, and usually the response I get is Biden isn't really able to convince Netanyahu, even over making small pauses for humanitarian assistance, that it's been so hard to push Netanyahu on that. And I'm thinking, if you can't push him on something so simple as a humanitarian assistance, oh my goodness, how can you do more? But on the other side, just you remember, Biden needs Arab and Muslim votes to win the next election. He could suffer significantly without that. And so he's finding himself now in a really no-win situation and doesn't know how to walk out of this mess.
Ayala Shalev, Binyamin Netanyahu can survive this one too?
I hope not. He's proven to everyone that he's very resilient. Talking with people around me, most of them think he won't survive. I'm still afraid he might even come out of this one standing on his feet.
It's just one man. Around him, there's a coalition, and right now there's what's called an emergency government in Israel because of the war. How much pressure is being brought to bear on him to try to find the political solutions that are needed from the broader Israeli society?
You mentioned before, this caught us like in the middle of a big split inside the Israeli society between the very, very right-wing radical government and a lot of the more middle-left population. His government wants this war to go on. If you look at what's going on in the West Bank, in the occupied territories, you can see why. I mean, there's no spotlight over there, and exactly that's the reason why things are going on there as they are. Local communities are being run out of their places, and settlements are being widened. Only a big, if the big protest that all the world saw, I think, will renew itself. Maybe beginning with a cry of bring the kidnapped back, and then holding the people that are to blame for this and calling for them to, step down.
We were talking a moment ago, Ibrahim Abu Ahmad. You heard Aziz in Washington describe how Joe Biden, he also needs Arab American votes for his re-election bid. What about in Israel? You yourself, you're a Palestinian Israeli. We remember in the past Binyamin Netanyahu courting the Arab vote from within Israel. Does he not need that anymore? Can he just rely on the right and far right?
I mean, the only time Netanyahu really, quote unquote, needed the Arab vote was in order to get more right wings to vote for him. He used a fear of Arabs in order to bring more votes from the right wing. It was the famous sentence from him in 2015 when we had 4 Arab parties and they merged into one. He had the sentence of the Arabs are going to the election polls in buses, trying to scare the people that we are trying to do some revolution with the fact that we're just voting and exercising our rights. So he did that in the past. He will do it again. But I think, the question is not, there's a lot of focus on whether or not Bibi will or will not survive the next elections. I'm not sure, but the question is much beyond him himself, because you asked the question of what do we do? How do we solve this conflict, and what were the problems that led to it? I mean, I think it's once and for all, it's time to put everything on the table. On one hand, both sides never truly wanted to create peace. Let's just put it on the table in terms of states. I'm not talking in terms of people, in terms of states. We had one shot in the 90s where we had actual real attempt. And after that, that was the end of it. And, back then, Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister of Israel, paid the ultimate price. He was assassinated by a radical Israeli. And since then, both sides were not interested in peace process. If you look at the expansion of the Israeli settlements since then, it's been more and more intense. And there was an attempt to prevent a 67 border line from being created, or even to create one real line, because all these new settlements are being created within Palestinian territory. In the same time, the PA also never truly fully wanted a two-state solution as well.
Why is that?
Because they also have all. Listen, both sides don't want to give up. For the Israelis, they don't want to give up fully, especially for the radical right wing, that vision, dream of the whole of Israel, that full state that includes Palestinian territory. The same holds true for the Palestinian side on the PA. There's always that vision of the entire Palestine return. It's about time people make decisions to create real two-state solution. For the Palestinian side, if you're looking at the PA has all the power, all the money, and none of the responsibility. If there's anything that happens in the West Bank, you can always say it's Israel's problem, we're under occupation. And what did the US do in all this time? That's another question. Only condemn Israel for expanding settlements, no real action against expansion of settlements, and at the same time just happy with the PA as it is and not looking at the actual problems.
Because you heard Aziz Abu Sara earlier saying in the short run, there's no alternative. It has to be the Palestinian Authority, the PA as you call it.
Absolutely, but the Palestinian Authority needs to be elected. We haven't had elections since 2006. What elected Palestinian Authority? We need a voice that represents the people, truly. That one doesn't. Let's just put it that way. If you ask somebody from the West Bank, he'll tell you I'm occupied twice. I'm occupied once by the PA and once by Israel. How is that party going to be the one to lead the people towards a two-state solution? How is it going to convince the people that's the right way to go if it's not supported by the people? And the same holds true for the current Israeli government. We need, if you want to create real two-state solution, you need a couple of things. You need a real leadership, and it's not one that listens to what the population says and acts upon it. That's representatives. Leaders bring visions, and they convince the public that this is the way to go. And we need that, and we don't have that at the moment. And the other thing is we need an understanding from both sides that we need to change. The perspective needs to change. The people are more important than the land for both sides. We can't have more and more generations living in that reality on and on. It can't go on anymore.
Ibrahim Abu
Ahmad,
maybe part of the answer is how ordinary citizens cohabitate. A couple of years back, we saw these, in some mixed towns in Israel, sectarian violence, something we hadn't seen so much before. What's it been like the past month for you personally?
Honestly, in the first few days, it's been very difficult in terms of, because we're both Palestinians and Israeli citizens. So I think we're the only ones who truly see the world from both eyes of the conflict. We have a Palestinian eye and we have an Israeli eye. We don't, as a community, always use them. But I've tried all my life to look at the world from these two eyes because I have the ability and capacity. I speak Hebrew and obviously I speak Arabic, and I see both realities. And I had friends on that Saturday that I was trying to help to, find their loved ones on Arabic telegrams, try to see maybe I can find something that they couldn't, try to see if they're kidnapped or dead. And then after that, I'm worried about my friends in Gaza and try to help friends out to get their families out of there and talking to whoever I can here. So that feeling of pain for both sides is real. And if you want to talk about, who has the key element to solving this conflict, who to negotiate with, it starts with us. It starts with my community, one that has been kind of invisible in the conflict. That no one talked about the Palestinian Israeli citizens. No one talks about us in that sense. We're just a byproduct of the conflict. No, we're the ones who hold the key to the conflict because we're the ones that are both. We can understand both sides and we can convey the feelings of both sides. And this country, and you mentioned the clashes 2 years ago, how is it that 75 years later, you still have a state that wasn't able to get its citizens to trust it? It hasn't truly got to a place that it trusts us or we trust it. That's the disaster.
And just give it to us plainly. Have Jewish people reached out to you in the last month?
A lot, absolutely. So many people trying to check if I'm also okay. I live in the north, so we were worried about what's happening in the north with Lebanon, and we had things over our heads as well in the past couple of weeks. I've been calling my friends, trying to make sure that everyone's okay. We're all struggling with everything that's going on, and they also understand my frustrations, and that I'm also worried about my friends also in Gaza. And I think even in the normal life, we're connecting the two sides. Even in the regular life, we feel both pains, and especially in these kind of catastrophes.
Hannah Weisfeld, you're in London. And I suspect that it must be kind of the same experience, whether you're Jewish or Palestinian, that you're having if you're in Paris or in Washington right now, and that is that it's very divisive and divided. I guess I could put the same question we put earlier to some of the other panelists. How is it different this time around?
Well, this is a war like no other war we've obviously ever witnessed. And so I have been running Yachad for over a decade now. And the genesis of the organisation, which works to build political support in the Jewish community and within our parliament here for a political resolution to the conflict, was actually born out of the 2008-2009 Gaza war, which was Operation Cast Lead. And this growing sense that there were many mainstream members of the British Jewish community here who felt that they wanted to actually not just advocate for Israel in a conflict, but basically to advocate for peace. And since then, there's been at least 4 major conflicts between Israel and Gaza. But this is very different. And I think that what we're seeing now is so much divisiveness and so much polarization, and people who are moving to such far ends of the political spectrum. And what is being lost is the nuance. So, listening to Ibrahim speak, that sense that there's got to be a different future, and that there are people who have been marginalized and shut out the conversation who really hold the key to that future. And I think that one of the things that's really challenging now is how do you elevate voices like his? How do you elevate voices of the peace and human rights camp in Israel, who have spent decades working with Palestinians and working with Palestinian friends inside Israel and within the occupied territories in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank? And how do you give them the voice to kind of chart out a future that is livable for both peoples? Because at the moment, what you hear here in the UK is a lot of noise, and that noise largely lacks any sense of reality for what it's like for people on the ground. It feels much more like a football match where people choose a side and and cannot even see the humanity in the people on the other side. So whether
we've had here in France the left tearing itself apart. I'm sure that sounds familiar, Hannah, when we see that the leader of the opposition has been rowing with his left wing.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. I mean, we have unique political challenges in this country to do with the history of what's happened with the Labour Party over the last 5-10 years. But I think people really struggle to understand how you can hold two competing thoughts. So how can you simultaneously hold a position which says what Hamas did on October the 7th is inexcusable and indefensible, and Israelis have a right to defend themselves from that, and that Israeli military activity and action in Gaza, which has killed thousands of people, is not necessarily going to bring Israel the security that it's looking for long term. And what is really missing from the political debate, in my view, and from where I'm sitting, is the discussion about what the political process is that needs to happen. Everybody's talking about what happens right now, but nobody's talking about what happens the day after the fighting ends, because ultimately there is no military solution to this conflict. And for 20 years, the international community has turned a blind eye and basically at best kind of intervened at moments.
Okay, but they're not turning a blind eye anymore, Hannah. And we saw it. There's been 4 trips by the U.S. Secretary of State. The French president's going to be organizing a humanitarian conference on Thursday. There's the Spanish Prime Minister has been calling for an international peace conference. Where do you start? Earlier we talked about civil society at the grassroots level over in Israel and in the Palestinian territories. Where do you start on the global stage? Where do you start when you're in London?
Well, I'll give you a good example. Today, I just came back from Parliament, and I took with me into Parliament a man called Magen Inon, whose parents were killed on October the 7th by Hamas. They lived in a community right on the border with Gaza. Magen lives in London, and he and his siblings, since his parents have been killed, have been very loud advocates for the need for Israel to pursue peace with its neighbours, and very clear about the fact that they don't ultimately believe that their parents' legacy will be fulfilled through a military solution. And actually, that room that he spoke to was the fullest room. We regularly take partners of ours from the region into Parliament. I've never seen such a full room of parliamentarians in this country who are desperately looking for moderate voices that they can get behind. And that's what they heard from Magen and the story of his parents and how he views the future for both Israelis and Palestinians. And actually what the international community needs to do is start giving a platform and a voice to people like Magen, to people, like those on this call who are Palestinians, who can articulate a different vision for the future. Because at the moment, the international community has lined itself up, much like the British public, to be honest, behind one side or another. And actually what we need is the United States, the European Union and the United Kingdom and the Arab world to line itself up behind a vision for 2 states, for 2 people, which is the only way in which there will be safety and security for both Israelis and Palestinians.
In 1 month, Aziz Abu Sarah, we have seen the political discourse evolve on the part of the French government, on the part of the U.S. government. How do you get to that place, though, where you could start talking about political solutions? How much of it depends really on a change of mindset within Israel and the Palestinian territories, and is it possible?
I think, unfortunately, even though this is where I think we should be going, I don't see governments really taking the lead right now. This is why I think bringing us into this conversation important. I know all the people in this panel, and we are friends, and I think the need for more people who present an alternative choice, an alternative way, a different path, that we're not enemies. Me and Hannah are friends for over 10 years, I think now, and we're not enemies, and that needs to be clear, because if you watch television today, if you watch the social media especially, you think every Palestinian, every Jew, every Israeli, if you're not with me, you're against me, and I don't see us on opposite sides, and that's
you heard
the message
Hannah,
we need to get our governments to understand.
You heard Anna describing how there were lawmakers in the British Parliament who wanted to find figures who could bridge the divide, who could find the common ground. Are you experiencing the same thing in the United States? We covered that there was this huge polarization on college campuses. Has it died down a little, that fury that we saw at the beginning?
No, the fury hasn't died down. I think people are angry. And look, watching what's going on, I think it's normal. People are angry, but also people are angry and don't know what to do. And just like Hannah said, the voices like ours are not right now the prominent ones everywhere. People looking for those kind of voices, but are not easy to be found. And when it comes to politicians, at least I can tell you in the US, most are very, very one-sided. Most are hardcore pro-Israel and not even willing to listen to a Palestinian, nevertheless hear what they have to say or think, oh, let's work together and figuring it out. But I think on the people level, yes, there has been. I know Muslim-Jewish visuals that has been happening together, Palestinian-Israeli conversations that have been happening together. Look, my business partner is Jewish. We've been doing some work together. My staff are mixed, half and half, Israeli-Palestinian. We got 20 of us yesterday having a conversation that was not easy, but very important. So those are happening. How do we translate that in the political realm is more challenging because unfortunately in politics, weapons, war seems to be what people think will bring security, and it's just, it doesn't matter how much it fails, it keeps happening. We keep investing in something that has failed for 75 years, and we keep assuming, oh, this time it's going to work out. We might come across like naive ourselves who believe that we can coexist together, but I think the ones who are naive are the ones who continue to invest in violence and assume that if we kill enough of them, if we push some of them out, if we hurt them more, it's going to work. And I know it firsthand. Look, my brother was killed when I was 10 years old by Israeli soldiers. I grew up on the vengeance aspect. I grew up hating. I grew up thinking the only way is to hurt the other side as much as possible, make them pay for it. And that just makes you more empty, and it doesn't make you feel better. Even when something bad happens to those on the other side, it doesn't make you feel better and doesn't make you feel safer. I don't think Israelis today anywhere in Israel are safer because of what Israel is doing in Gaza or in the West Bank. And obviously it's not safer for Palestinians. So we got to change the discourse of this conversation from how can we make it safer for one, or how do we live together in this land where it's safe and free for both of us? It sounds so normal, so simple, and yet when you talk about and we talk about how do we get there, everyone tells you how incredibly complicated. It's really not incredibly complicated. It takes will, it takes understanding that status quo cannot sustain, and that's what we peace activists in some ways have failed to do in the past. We've tried to warn. We tried, like what I'm telling you now, we've said it 15 years ago. We couldn't convince politicians to listen. I hope this time, seeing the price we all paying for it, that they will listen.
We'll have to leave it there for now. Aziz Abusar, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Washington. I want to thank Ayala Shalev in Jerusalem, Ibrahim Abu Ahmad in Tel Aviv, Hannah Weisfeld in London. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 today.